Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Pablo Avila, and I will be facilitating this session. Thank you very much for taking the time to attend and join us today. We will go ahead and begin. I have my colleague Oscar Cortez, who from the center as well, who will be monitoring the chat. If you're able to see the chat from your screen, you should be able to see number one with a notification on the top and a button that says more. If you click on it, you should be able to see the chat. And I asked everyone to just enter their names and the departments to see who we have in the session today. We will continue to use the chat as we move along so that participants are able to ask questions. And my colleague Oscar is going to be monitoring the chat so that we make sure we cover as many questions as we can. I wanted to let you know of a couple of logistics up front. First of all, this session is being recorded and it will be shared later via YouTube. I will send an email to everyone who registered and probably tonight or by tomorrow morning so that you can revisit this recording if you want. You will be able to revisit the entire session or specific segments if you would like. There is a resource document in putting together these sessions. We realized that there's plenty of resources we wanted to share with all of you. So we have put it all in one single document. The link is right there on your screen, and I will show you what that document looks like in just a moment. During the session, attendees will be muted for the purposes of the presentation of the demo. And later in the session, there will be a chance for you to ask specific questions if you have any. However, during the session, you can always use the chat feature. And once again, my colleague Oscar will be monitoring the chat and raising questions as I move along. Um, I wanted to let you know that there's live transcriptioning that it's available in this session. We realized, we were notified that CUNY enabled this live transcription, live captioning in a couple of days ago, and we have done some quick testing before we share this, and we wanted to make sure that you know this is available. I will go over that feature specifically during this session as well. This session will cover what you see on the screen, host controls, security options, and also managing participants in your Zoom call, whether it is a meeting if you're a staff member or your class if you're a faculty member. We will go over all of the options available in the Zoom environment so that you can make sure you are aware of everything that is available to you as a host, as the host of your meeting. In addition to the three items that you see right there, as I mentioned, I will be going over the live transcription, live caption feature since that was recently released by CUNY a couple of days ago. Okay. I wanted to let everybody know of a couple of what we're going to be doing today. This is a 1-hour session, but it can take a little longer if we need to. I will be happy to answer all questions that you may have via the chat. This is a demo session of specific features. We're not going to cover everything about Zoom. So we will cover the things that I have mentioned in the previous slide. Attendees, you are all encouraged to follow along and in your browser, do the things as I do. However, if you feel that you might want to pause and just pay attention to what I do on the screen, you can visit the recording later on if you want to revisit specific steps or segments of the recording. Once again, the resource document, it's key. I'm going to show you what that looks like in just a moment. You're going to be able to access the slides that you're seeing right now, tutorials, and many more, a lot of more information. And that document, it's publicly available. You can share that with other colleagues, and that document is also regularly updated with additional resources as well. And as I mentioned, the recording will be available hopefully later tonight or tomorrow sometime, and you will receive an email, everyone who registered for this session. And the recordings are posted to the CTL's YouTube account. I want to show you, I want to go over a quick few points and we will move along after that. The Zoom website has a help center section with lots of tutorials that cover a range of different features. Once you have access to the slides that you're seeing right now, in just a moment, you will be able to access that. And they have plenty of quick how-to videos about different resources on Zoom. The second bullet point, it's something that IT recommended that we share with everyone in these training sessions. The Zoom cloud storage for faculty and staff is quite limited. The cloud storage, and each user should limit their usage to 1 gigabyte. It's important to know that this is cloud storage, okay? Cloud storage, which is different than recording your Zoom meetings and sessions to your local computer. I will go over the differences in just a moment, but IT recommends that we always perform a local recording whenever we record our sessions, and use Dropbox as a way to share our files with faculty, with the students. I'm sorry. If you want to share the recordings of your classes with your students, you can share the link via an email, via Blackboard. The other training session that I mentioned in my email covers specifically how to enable your Dropbox CUNY account, okay? And then the bottom item is for those who want to send inquiries to IT specifically. The email address is zoomhelp@ligcc.cuny.edu. We in the center receive many different questions from faculty, and we try to respond to them, whether it's individually or with sessions like this. But whenever there is a technical matter, something that is best addressed by IT, sending an email to that email address will get you the response that you need. I want to move along here, but I want to ask Oscar, are there any quick questions up front?
No questions.
Okay. So like I said, this session is going to cover very specific features on Zoom, specifically the host controls, some security options in the security button that we're going to explore in just a moment, and the management of participants. But I wanted to put some basic things up front. Every CUNY employee, a student, faculty, and staff should access their CUNY account from this website, and we're going to log in together in just a moment. cuny.zoom.us. Downloading the client is always beneficial and recommended. If you're able to download this on your device, you can do that directly from the Zoom website. And if you download the client, and I will show you what that looks like in a moment, and you log into the client using your CUNY credentials, you do not necessarily have to log in every time you open the client. You can think of it like your email Outlook on your computer. Every time you open your email, it shows you your email. It doesn't necessarily ask you to log in every single time. That is the benefit of having the client on your device. And important point, make sure that you're logging in with your CUNY login credentials. And those are your first name, that last name, and 2 digits, which I believe are the last 2 digits of your CUNY MPOL ID. And the rest of the user ID is the @login.cuny.edu. A lot of faculty and even students get confused, and they think that they need to log in with their Outlook or Live email addresses, but that's not the case. They need to use the CUNY login credentials. That is important to remember at all times. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to shift my screen now, and I am going to show you what that looks like. Again, you are free to move along with me, or if you want to pay attention to how I demonstrate all of these features and then later review them in the recording, that's fine as well. The first thing that I want to do, Oscar, you should be able to see the Google document at this point, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so the first thing that I wanted to show you is the Google document, and I'm going to post this on the chat. If you are looking at the chat, you can go ahead and click on this document. Like I mentioned, this document is publicly available. You can share this with any other colleagues. And if you have resources that you may find helpful for us to share, please send me an email. There have been plenty of people who have sent me quick videos and resources, and I put them right here as well. Up on the top, what I wanted to show you is these are the sessions that I am conducting between this and next week. This is the session that we are on right now, the focus session that covers the host control security options. You can click here to register. You obviously registered already, but here is the link to the PowerPoint slide that I am using. So please go ahead and use that if that is what you are looking for. The other session that I mentioned covers the recording sessions, and this covers the use of the CUNY Dropbox account. So if you want, I believe I have a couple of more sessions. Yeah, I have one session on Monday, so you can go ahead and register for that as well. Okay, if you scroll down on that same document, you will see previous sessions that we have run, and the recordings are available there as well. And then there's plenty of more resources and quick tutorials for using Zoom that you can use, you can revisit in your own time. Okay. So as I mentioned, the URL, the website to log into CUNY, the CUNY Zoom account will be cuny.zoom.us. Okay, and once you do that, you simply hit on sign in, and you will be greeted with this login screen. And remember, this is where you need to input your CUNY login credentials. Okay, not your Outlook, but your CUNY login credentials, and those will be the first name, that last name, and followed by the two digits of your ample ID, and then the CUNY first password, and then you simply go ahead and click on login, as I did a moment ago, and you enter your account. Okay. A couple of quick things that I want to show you up front, and this is something that I recommend all users to do, especially those users who are either new to Zoom or who have never done this, and that is to revisit the settings, to check the settings on your account. The settings on your account on this section right here, once you log into the browser, will allow you to tweak global settings that you will be using on a regular basis. Okay, in that way, whenever you schedule a meeting, those settings will be applied already, most of them. For instance, the waiting room. If that is something that you want to use as a faculty member, you can always enable the waiting room, and then on any meeting that you schedule, by default, the waiting room will be automatically enabled. That way you don't have to be checking that every single time. There's many more options here, but I will only go over a couple of them, okay? But I do suggest that whether you're doing this right now or at a later point, that you do visit the settings, because that is important. This one require a passcode when scheduling meetings. It's one option that IT recommends to add another layer of security to your meetings. One of the things that I will briefly touch upon, and this is something that the college is concerned about, is how faculty are using Zoom so that they can avoid instances of unwanted behavior in your classes, whether someone is displaying behavior that's not appropriate, or whether you have an unwelcomed guest in your Zoom meetings. We want to make sure that these sessions are informing your practice so that you know what to do. The settings is specifically important. If you require a passcode when scheduling new meetings, what that will do is it will add another layer of security, which will make your sessions more secure. And we say that with caution, because obviously if someone wants to hack into a meeting, they will find different methods, but adding a passcode is a very simple way to add a layer of security to your sessions. Um, a And this option right here, embed passcode in invite link for one-click join, is also one that I recommend that you turn on. What does that do? The meeting passcode, it says in here, will be encrypted and included in the invite link to allow participants to join with just one click without having to enter the passcode. So what it does is, and we will look at this in just a moment, when you enable schedule a meeting and you do not have the passcode enabled, the URL will be short and fairly easy to decode. But if you enable a passcode and you have this option on, what it will do is it will create a longer URL that will embed the passcode in it so that it's much more difficult for someone to decipher and therefore hack into. It embeds that passcode into the URL, and when the user clicks on that long URL, the user will be able to enter the meeting without having to necessarily enter a passcode manually. It is another layer of security, but at the same time, this one makes it easier, especially when the user is not familiar with the Zoom interface. I am sure you may have had either colleagues or students who are struggling to get into a meeting and they say, oh, what's the meeting ID? And they don't know the meeting ID. Once they get it, oh, now I need a passcode. What's the passcode? So if you enable this option right here, a long URL that will embed that passcode will be generated and will take the participant directly into the meeting. Okay. This also is an important option, which I personally do not enable, but it's important that we go over this. Only authenticated users can join meetings, and this is what the description is. The participants need to authenticate prior to joining the meetings. Hosts can choose one or the authentication methods when scheduling a meeting. And what this means is that if you turn this on, you're forcing the user to have to sign on to their account on Zoom so that they are able to join your meetings. Okay. It obviously adds a layer of security because you are forcing the user to recognize himself or herself with an account in order to be able to enter the meeting. But at the same time, it can complicate things for users that may not be familiar with the system and or who may not have an account or may not know how to activate their account um, and um, and therefore they will have problems logging in. So it is an important option that you should be aware of. Everyone who uses Zoom should be aware of. I personally do not use that, but this is my personal preference. I advise that you proceed with caution, and if you want to turn that on, it's fine, but just be aware that that is what that option looks like. Okay. A couple of additional options, and I understand that I'm going over a lot. Again, this is being recorded, and I'm not going to go over every single setting in here, only a couple that I have highlighted as important for you to know during this session. In the same panel on the settings on your browser, uh, if waiting room is enabled, phone-only users will be placed in the waiting room. And if waiting room is not enabled, full dial-in only users will be allowed to join the meeting or be blocked from joining the meeting. So this is depending on your needs. And what this means is that if you're opening your meetings for someone to join from a computer or from a phone device dialing a number, you are able to distinguish between users who joined from whatever device they may have. I personally do not distinguish because my students may join from a computer, from a tablet, from a phone. But we should all be aware of how these options apply, especially if you want to add a layer of security in your meetings. I personally leave this as you see it on the screen because when I have people in my waiting room, I make sure that they are identifying themselves. And if I know the person, then I let them in. If not, I can always send them a message and tell them to identify themselves if they need to. Let's see, as I go through these options, Oscar, are there any questions at this point?
No questions.
Okay. Let's see. An additional option that I recommend and I go over with faculty a lot is under the section in Meeting Basic. And we're going to visit our Zoom environment in just a moment, but the chat is a very highly used feature in Zoom calls this day, and there's a couple of options that we should be aware of. Under the settings, and these are the settings that apply globally to all the meetings that we have in our accounts, in the chat, you can either allow or disable the chat. Obviously, you can always enable it if you're going to be using it constantly. If you check this option right here, you can prevent participants from saving the chat. In this case, if you're teaching a class and you want to use it constantly with your students, but you don't want your students to save the chat for whatever reason, you can always check this option and they will not be able to save it as a participant. However, you as the host will always have the chance to save the chat yourself for your own records. So a number of faculty have asked, how can I prevent my students from saving the chat if I am sharing something that I don't want them to have access to at a later point? This could be the option that can help you, preventing the participants from saving the chat. You can change this during your session, and I will show you how to do that. All of these settings will be default settings that will be globally applied whenever you have any standard meeting. So during the session, you can always tweak all of this, and I will show you how to do that. Another one, if you want to have regular meetings where you don't want your students to be speaking to one another, you can also disable the private chat. And what this means is that you can allow or not allow meeting participants to send private messages among themselves. So if I am teaching a class and I want my students to be able to send messages to one another without me noting that, you can always enable that. But if you do not want that, you can always disable that. And if you disable it, what it's going to happen is they will be able to send, as a participant, a message to everyone in the class or to you only as the host. Those will be the only options. But if you enable this, then they will be able to send a third type of message, which will be send a message only to someone else in the class. So this is another important feature that you should know as the host. Oscar, are there any questions?
Yes, one question.
Yeah.
So how can I give option to share the whiteboard to students?
How to share the? Can you repeat,
So
please?
so how can I give the share option to the whiteboard to students?
Oh, okay. Actually, that is, I'm going to go over that when we go over our Zoom environment. But the share, it's also somewhere around here. But I will go over the sharing feature when I go over the security button. So please, Oscar, remind me there, and I will answer that question specifically. Okay. Um, Whenever you in the chat, and with this, I will move to the next part. In the chat feature, in the chat space, there's also an option to share files. And if you want to share a Word document or an Excel sheet or a PDF or an image, you can do that if you turn on the option file transfer. Now, the extra layer of security and to avoid students having to send each other files that may not be safe, you can always check this option right here, allow specified file types. And let's say that you're working with only Word documents or only Excel spreadsheets or only PDFs, you can always put all of these extensions. And if the student or the user is trying to send a file that is not recognized by any of those in the list, then the user will not be able to send that file. This is particularly helpful if you have had an unfortunate experience of anyone sending, whether it's an inappropriate file or whether it is a file that could even be a malware. So this is an extra layer of security that you can add if you regularly share files in your chat. You can always disable this, and what that means is that your chat feature will only be used to send text messages to the whole class if you turn this off. But if you turn it on, you will be able to send files. Okay. So I'm going to share my screen, stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to now share my entire desktop right now. And Oscar, you should be able to see my Zoom environment, correct?
Correct.
So I am sharing my entire Zoom environment for a specific reason. I want to show you what all of these features will look like once you are the host. So one of the key things that I want to highlight here is every time that, and I always go over this with faculty, when you open your Zoom and you're not sharing anything with your students, always be aware of the two views that you have. The default will always be the speaker view, okay? And in this case, I am interacting with my colleague Oscar, so that is why he's spotlighted. But if I toggle and I go into gallery, the gallery will be able to give me a better distribution of everyone in my class. Also, I wanted to point out that in the release 5.3 version of Zoom, I am able to rearrange my video thumbnails in any way that I want. So for example, if you are teaching a class and you will soon have students present, you can align them. And let's say that I want my colleague Oscar to be right here. And let's say that I want my colleague Javier who will present next and my colleague Ed who will present next. You can line them up and that way you have a better distribution of your class. Or let's say that you want to keep an eye out for one student who may need some help. You may bring them right then. Let's say that you want to bring my colleague Elliot to the right on the top so that I make sure that I am checking in with him. So allowing you to move the video thumbnails in your screen as a faculty member in the gallery mode will allow you to have a better distribution of your class. The ability to rearrange these video thumbnails comes with version 5.3 in the client. So, and I'm going to show you how to update your client in just a moment. Okay. A couple of things that I wanted to show you also on will be at the bottom of your screen. If you take a look at my screen at the bottom, let's just start from left to right, okay? And on the left, obviously, I have my mute microphone. If I simply so you were not able to hear me there because I muted myself. It's important that you help your students understand and become more familiar with the Zoom environment. If you toggle over if you click on the small icon, you will be able to see more options. A lot of the times, and I find this issue being quite common among all users, whenever they have headphones like this, or they want to switch to the computer microphone, sometimes the audio may not work even when they are not muted. It always helps to click on this option and help them navigate to the different options right here. In case they have more than one microphone, helping them toggle between those options will normally solve the problem. The same with the video. If you simply click on it, now you don't see me, now you do. So it always helps to help students become familiar with it. And then in the same case, in this case, I'm using the default camera on my computer, but I can also enable another computer. And sometimes this may be the case for students as well. The choosing a virtual background is also another important feature. If the student is choosing, however you have your arrangements in your class, if you're asking your students to turn their videos on, or if you're giving them the option, in whatever case, if they do have the option to turn that on, choosing a virtual background, it's always an option for them. And if you have, I believe, version 5.0 or above, you will be able to enable the a virtual background feature. Sometimes I have found users who are not able to enable this, and the reason may be because their computer may not support that particular feature. So that is something to be aware of. Okay. Moving on from left to right, now we are going into the security button. And the security button was an important and major release that Zoom put out in mid-April. You may remember when Zoom became very popular in the last days of March as we transitioned to distance learning. They unfortunately had many security issues, so they implemented this particular button. You will see this on every meeting where you are a host. So if you're looking for this button, in your case, you probably will not find it. I see it on my screen because I am the host. So every time that you conduct a session, you run a session, you run a meeting, you will find the security button in your controls. Let's go from top to the bottom what these options are. The first one is lock the meeting. And the analogy that I give here is very simple. Imagine that everyone is in the room and you go to the door and that you lock it. It means someone else from outside will not be able to enter the room. So that is essentially what the lock meeting is. If you have a class of 25 students and you know that all 25 are in the session and you're not expecting anyone else and you want to be extra cautious about security, you might want to lock the meeting. And what that means is that no one else will be able to enter the meeting, even if they have the right link, the right meeting ID, and the right passcode. Okay, so if you're expecting students, however, and you have locked the meeting, then they will have trouble. They will have trouble accessing the class, right? So whenever the situation whatever the situation may be, you can always lock the meeting if you want to be extra cautious. The enable waiting room. I mentioned in the overview of the settings that when you are scheduling a meeting, and I can go over this in just a moment, you can enable the waiting room. But one of the big caveats that faculty always point out is that if you enable the waiting room, you have to let each student in at a time. You can admit all if you know all and you see them all in the list. You can admit them all at once. But if not, someone, it's almost like knocking on the door and they have to wait for you to open the door and let them in. So obviously in a meeting, it's very different than being in a class. If you don't want to spend the time on enable on letting them in while they're in the waiting room, you may disable that. However, one of the big changes in Zoom was that before you could either turn the waiting room on or off, but during the session, you were not able to change that. Now you are able to. So let's say that I don't want anyone to suddenly coming into my session, but I did not enable the waiting room ahead of time. I can always enable the waiting room during my session, okay? In some instances, let's say that you have had the unfortunate circumstance of having an unwelcome guest in your class, you can always enable the waiting room so that you are certain who is coming into the door and waiting for you to let them in, or you can lock the meeting, right? In this option right here, and I think this will answer the question that Oscar shared, is allow participants to, okay? By default, in my case, because of the settings that I chose in the section, the page that I showed you at the beginning, I allowed my participants to use the chat, to rename themselves, and to unmute themselves. Okay, but I can always change that. Remember that I mentioned that those settings were globally applied to your meetings, but during the meeting you were able to tweak some of them. This is how you do it. So obviously, where you see a check, it's because it is enabled. If I do not want my participants, my students to use the chat, I will simply click on it and they will not be able to chat at all. But right now I am purposely using the chat and my colleague Oscar is moderating that, so I don't want to do that. The share screen right now, it's not enabled. If I click on the share screen, that means that any participant will be able to share. By default, Zoom only enables the sharing for the hosts and the co-hosts, okay? Not anyone else by default. So if you are having your students present or you're having them do an activity and they have to share their work, you might want to go to the security and enable the share screen if you want them to do that. Okay, this also works whenever you are sending your students to a breakout room. A faculty member asks, how can I make sure that my students in the breakout room will be able to share their work amongst themselves? Before you open the breakout room, if you click on this option and share screen, uh, you will be able to then send them into the breakout room and they will be able to share their screen at any time that they want. Okay, so if that is something that you want them to do, here is the option. Rename themselves. Rename themselves is a very important feature that I always go over with faculty. And this happens quite commonly, especially at least what I see in my students. Sometimes they joined from a device that it's their brother's or their family's device. And sometimes they may, it may say John, but it suddenly is my student Mary. And Mary says, oh, I'm sorry, I'm using my husband's computer. So in that case, you can allow the students to rename themselves so that they can put their correct names in Zoom. And the way they do that is they go straight into their video thumbnail, as you can see right here on the three dots, and then they will look for the option rename. If you have allowed them to rename themselves, they can go into that option and then add their names. But you as the host will always have that option regardless of whether you allow them to do that or not. So let's say that I want my colleague Oscar, let's pretend that's not his name. I can always go into his video thumbnail and I can always click on rename and I can rename him and I can do that for him. Sometimes the students may have a hard time navigating, oh, where is the option? Where is that? As long as I identify my students, I tell them, I'll do it for you. Don't worry. It takes me 2 clicks to put their names. And that way I make sure that everyone in the meeting has a name that I recognize from my roster. That also helps if you are choosing to use those names for attendance purpose. If you want to make sure that you keep attendance and you know who is coming to your class, you make sure that you tell them, make sure that you have your first name and last name so that I can mark you absent. It depends on any logistics that you may have arranged with your students, okay? Unmute themselves essentially means that if I want my participants, my students to have the ability to unmute themselves without me letting them do that, they can also do that. I can always remove that option and they will not have the option to unmute themselves. So that is another option that you have available to you as well. The annotate on share content, and I will go into the share button in just a moment, means that if I am sharing a website or anything on my screen, and if I allow my students to have the ability to annotate, that means that they may be able to go into that website and make annotations on the browser. So it is very helpful if you want students to contribute to something that's visually and collectively done from everyone in the group. However, be aware that there may be cases where students maybe they will have the ability to annotate and they may have the liberty to write anything they want. So you may be cautious when using that as well. And going back to security options, the remove participant, if you have the instance of someone who is not welcome in your class and you simply you want to invite them to leave, you click on the remove participant and then Zoom will give you right away the list of the participants who are in the call. And let's say that you don't recognize someone in the call and you have asked them multiple times to identify themselves and they're not doing that, you can always hit on the remove button and they will be kicked out from the session automatically. So that is another security button that it's available. And then finally, the report is if you have an incident where you experience, whether it's someone who came to your session uninvited or you have someone who displayed inappropriate behavior, Zoom as a platform itself has this reporting ability, which will then I think they will look into their account and they may take some action, but make sure that you are aware that this is not connected to the college. This goes directly to Zoom. I'm going to share some information how you could report any unwanted behavior in your classes to the college, but I will share that in a moment. But I want to make sure that I mention this up front as well. I want to stop here and ask Oscar if there are any questions as I move along.
No questions so far.
Okay, so let me go into, now going from left to right, if I click on participants, I will be able to see all of my participants in this call. Again, I am showing you my Zoom interface so that you are able to see what the host controls are. It's important to mention this. There's always one host in the meeting, and you can have multiple co-hosts, but the host it's always one. Okay. So right now, for instance, my colleague Oscar, he's a co-host. If I want him to be a host, I am going to give up my privileges and I will become a participant. So remember, host, it's only one. You can have as many co-hosts as you want, and the co-hosts will have the same ability as you as a co-host has, minus the breakout room assignment. The breakout room assignment can only be performed by the host. And obviously, if you see, let's say, I want my colleague Ed to be a co-host, all I have to do is go in here. I will see the more button, and then I will simply choose the option make co-host. And he will then become a co-host and will have the same abilities that I am able to do here. And if I make him a host, I will give up my privileges. So it's important to mention that. You have a couple of other options for each participant. And I want to point this out, and this is something minor, but I think it is helpful. By default, every time that you open a panel at the bottom of your screen, you will have this floating window that right now I am working on a 13-inch MacBook Pro, which it's good, but gives me only so much space. And I want to make sure that I'm able to have the full extent of my screen to see all of my participants. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and click on Merge to Meeting window. And what that's going to do is it's going to put it on the side and it will give me a better distribution of my screen. This is a minor tip, but I think it's helpful, especially if you're working from a laptop, as it is my case right now. Um, and then under each participant, you have additional options as well. In addition to either making them a host, if that is what you want, or a co-host, you can also assign them to type closed caption, which is not an option that it's regularly used. I will go over the live captioning in a moment. You can allow them to record. By default, the only person who is allowed to record is the host and the co-hosts. So if any of you, for instance, would like to record something right now, you as a participant will have to request permission from the host, and we can allow you to record. But by default, no one else should be able to record other than the host or the co-hosts. Okay. The rename, obviously, if I will go over the multi-ping in just a moment, but the putting waiting room, it is an important feature that it's quite helpful as well. And I normally use this when I am conducting office hours in Zoom. What I do is I have my office hours that are open and students can come in groups and ask me questions. But if someone would like to have a one-on-one conversation with me and I have two people in front of me, I can always put one of them in the waiting room, and then it's essentially asking the person to wait outside for a moment while I speak to this one person only. And then once I have that one-on-one conversation with someone, I can allow the person in the waiting room to return to the main room. That's quite helpful, especially when you have a couple of the students in front of you in the call and you want to have all of them except one wait in the waiting room if you want to have a one-on-one conversation. So you can put them in the waiting room and then bring them back. And obviously the remove and report are the same options that you would have right here at the bottom of the security. The multi-ping is if you want to allow a, where was this option? I think it was right here. The multi-ping is if you want to allow the participant to be able to multi-ping different videos in the Zoom call. This is particularly helpful if you want Zoom, it's audio based. It means that if you are on the speaker view, it will highlight the person who is speaking. But if you are a student who needs to see, for instance, a sign language interpreter at all times, the sign language interpreter is not speaking, but it's translating, it's interpreting for that other student. So that student can ping someone else's video so that they are able to see that person at all times, even when someone else is speaking. So that option is always helpful, especially for students who may want to see a sign language interpreter at all times. I want to stop here and ask Oscar if there's any questions.
Yes, so there's a question on how can I prevent a student interconnecting a chat?
Interconnecting?
Yes.
It,
MD, can you clarify?
yes, and MD, if you could unmute yourself and explain your question, I'll be happy to answer it. Let's see. How can I prevent a student interconnecting in the chat? I'm not sure if you're referring to the option, the student sending multiple, the student sending messages to another student only, if that
Yes.
is, okay. Okay, so let me share my screen once again. So Oscar, you should be able to see my Zoom environment right now, right?
Correct.
Okay, so I mentioned that in the settings, you could prevent that globally so that by default you have those options. However, during a session, you can also tweak those settings. I've opened the chat. I see the chat here. And then right here on the bottom right, you will be able to see the options for file. If you see the file button, it's because the person is enabling the option to share files. If you do not see it, it's not because it doesn't work. It simply means that the person has disabled that feature. But the question, to answer Raman's question, MD's question, if you look into the ellipsis button right here and you click on it, you have a few options. First, you as a host can save the chat, okay? And you can save the chat and it will generate a text file that you can then refer to. But then you have the options for participants can chat with. If I choose the option no one, that means that no one will be able to send messages at all. If I choose the option host only, participants will be able to send messages only to me and no one else. And if I choose everyone, then that means the participant will be able to send multiple types of messages. So this answers your question, MD. If you want to disable that option, you can either choose either one of the first two, but if you're using the chat feature, then obviously you can enable the second option, which is host only. That means that students will only be able to send a message to you, but not one else. So that is the option right there. And then don't forget that under security, you also have the option to either turn on or off the chat for the participants, okay? I wanna move on to the next, we already went over the chat and I'm gonna close this so that I can have a better distribution of my screen. And I'm gonna move to the share button, okay? In the share button, obviously, if you want your participants, your students to be able to share content, you want to make sure that you enable this option right here, okay? Allow participants to share content, okay? So if you check that off, then you will be able to let your students click on the share button and be able to have all of the options that you see in front of me. If you do not allow that up, if you do not enable that option, when they click on share, they will simply be greeted by a pop-up window that says the host has disabled sharing. All right, so the first step, if you want that to be the case, make sure that you go into security and check share screen. And if you do that, then your students will be able to access the whiteboard, which was the question that was raised a moment ago. I personally have not extensively used the whiteboard, so I am not entirely sure how the features that it offers, but I know it's quite helpful. I believe you can also connect it to an iPad and a stylus if you have an iPad or any kind of pencil or a stylus with a tablet. But I'm not entirely sure. But that is the option is there, and you can enable that for your students if that is what you're looking for. Under advanced, a couple of one feature that it's normally overlooked, I think it's to share a portion of your screen. And if you only want to share one segment of a browser or one segment of your screen, you can always go into the advanced and share that. Let's say that you are sharing something in your email, but you do not want them to see the list of emails, but you want them to see the folder structure. I shared this with a colleague whom I wanted to share a structure that I had on my email, and I only chose those lists and folders without displaying my whole email address because there were stuff that I didn't necessarily want to share. So you simply click on this, and then Zoom will ask you to share only a segment or of your screen, and the participant will only see that. I think this is quite useful, and I don't think it's too advanced, but it's quite overlooked because it is under advanced. So I always share this with faculty. The polling, it's not something that I'm going to go extensively over, but it is an option that's available if you want to do any kind of polling. It is a very good feature, but at the same time, it presents some caveats. You can only do multiple choice answers. You cannot post any kind of open-ended questions, and it's quite limited in terms of the format of the questions that you can ask your participants, but it's there, and I think it's helpful if you have a very basic need. I want to go over the live transcription because I'm looking at the time. For the live transcription, I want to take you back very quickly to the settings. So I want to go back to this page, and Oscar, you should be able to see my browser with my settings pane, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So in the settings, this is the same page that I took you over, that I showed you at the very beginning of the session. The one option to enable live transcription that I want you to look for is the live captioning, live transcription. So you simply do a Control F or Command F if you are on a Windows or Mac. And this is the option that you're looking for. Enable live transcription service to show transcript on the panel. So this is a very useful feature that I recommend users to make sure that it's checked off. If it is checked off, as it is in this case, great. That means that once you go into your meeting space, if you click on live transcript, before you used to have these three buttons only: assign a participant to type, I will type, or use a third-party service. But now we have the enable live transcription, live captioning. Right now it says disabled because it is enabled. So you will have this option available. And if you click on the small icon that you see right here, you will be able to have additional settings. And the very useful one that I am recommending a lot of users is the view full transcript. And if you click on this, what it's going to happen is it will essentially display the full transcript on the right side, and it will transcribe everything that I am saying as I speak. The benefit of this is also that it is transcribing what each person is saying. So right now it is transcribing what the things that I am saying. If my colleague Oscar interjects, it will have his name along with what he says. And it is much more intuitive in terms of knowing who said what. As you can see on the subtitles at the bottom, they do not include my name. It simply transcribes everything that it's being said. But in here, it's much more intuitive in terms of knowing who said what. So that is a quite useful feature that I always recommend. And you also have the option to save the transcript. If you want to have this as a file at a later point, you can also do that. I want to make a stop here. The next thing that I'm going to show you is the client, the client, and how to run updates. But I want to ask my colleague Oscar and see if there's any questions at this point.
So yes, now there's a question regarding, so if I use PowerPoint and whiteboard side by side, can I use that at the same time? So my response to that was that yes, but it would have to be sharing full screen.
Correct. You would have to be sharing your full screen. So right now you are able to see my full screen. If let's say that I want to show you this picture right here, and right now you see, I think you're able to see both screens right now, right, Oscar?
Yes.
So let's say that this is your PowerPoint and I want to show you this, and I also want to see a whiteboard right here. You can do that, but you would have to have your full desktop shared, and that means the desktop. All of this will have to be the option and not necessarily the whiteboard. I think you're able to do that. That also works if you want to have multiple applications. Let's say that you are showing a Word document right here with directions and a handout, and a YouTube video right here with a movie or with a documentary or with a clip. So you can have multiple applications in your screen that you can show side by side, but you would have to show your entire desktop for you to be able to do that. So yeah. Any other questions?
No other questions.
So let me go over then the client. As you can see, I am working on a Mac right now, but if you have a Windows, it will be the same. If you download the client, the resource document that I'm going to show you in a moment will be the way to go to be able to download the client from the Zoom website. Once you download the client, you should be able to see a profile icon on the top right. You will obviously see your information, and then at the bottom, you will see the option check for updates. And that will be the option for you to check if there are specific updates that you need to make sure that you have on your client. As you can see, I have a new version that's waiting for me. Once I am done with this session, I will go ahead and update. And if you click that, once you have the latest update, you will see no updates available. Right now, version 5.4.1, it's available, and version 5.40 is the one that I currently have. So obviously, if you hit update, in some cases, it may ask you to restart your computer if it's a major update, but if not, it will simply ask you to close the client and open it again for the updates to kick in. So that is how you enable that, and that is how you go over the client for running updates. Any questions at this point?
No questions, Pablo.
Okay, no questions. So let me just quickly go over a few additional things that I wanted to show you. So we have gone over some of this, all of these features. So it's important that you familiarize yourself. The host controls are slightly different than the participants. So always, whenever you start your own meeting, you should be able to be aware of those. And I wanted to end the session by sharing some important information. I checked in with my colleagues on IT to ensure that we are relaying the most accurate information to faculty and staff. In the event that you encounter any kind of inappropriate behavior, whether it's sexual or race related, you should always consider reporting that to the college. There's a discrimination and sexual misconduct information that I will show you. It is right here on your screen. I will show you where to get access to this in just a moment. Christopher Carroza is the Title IX person who you should contact. These are hyperlinks that will direct you to resources that the college has put together in the event that a faculty member or a staff member wants to report something. Please make sure that you check that. I want to share, actually, before I end with my recommendations, what my resource document looks like. If you go into here, I'm going to put this on the chat. If you click on the link on the chat, you will go into this resource document that I'm displaying on the screen. This has a lot of information, but the one information that it's important to highlight is right here under Zoom training sessions for October. Right here, this is the link to our slides, the slides that I am going over right now. So this slides will give you all of the information, including the sexual misconduct and discrimination information and contact that I share. So please make sure that you revisit that at one point after our session. And this will also show you the sessions that are available from Monday. in case you want to learn about the other features. If you scroll down on that same document, you will be able to find additional resources with videos and the download how to update your Zoom client. It's item number 11. And this will show you the steps, essentially the same steps that I covered a moment ago, and downloading your client if you're able to download the client on your device. Okay, so I'm going to share my slides once again. And these are some final recommendations that I wanted to share with you. Always using, obviously, the full extent of your host control so that you are able to have a smooth class in your with your students. Using nonverbal feedback to keep students engaged. Using the breakout room whenever possible, and obviously updating your client, especially when it comes to security updates, is always important. And this morning, I came across an additional resource, which I am going to share right now from the Graduate Center. Our colleagues in the Graduate Center put together a very nice infographic that I am going to post on the chat right now. And it is a tip sheet for a tip sheet for having a smooth and safe communication in Zoom classes with your students. So I posted the link to this in the chat. So please make sure that you take a look at it. I think it offers very helpful tips and feedback, especially for keeping students engaged, especially if you have a quite a long class that you plan to have with your students. So that's all I have. Are there any final questions at this point, Oscar or anyone?
Nothing on the chat on my end.
Okay. So if there are no additional questions, we'll wrap up our session. I hope the session was helpful. Remember that this is being recorded and will be shared via email later in the day or by tomorrow. It will be posted to the CTL's YouTube account, and it will be available to anyone so that they can either revisit the entire session or segments of the session if you would like. Thank you again for your participation. If you have any questions, you can always email me. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And thank you to Oscar for moderating as well. Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.